Okay, so now let's get to R2. So R2, we need to argue that even though there's growth, which is a good thing, just because there's growth, there may not be an increase in standard of living for residents in the country. So what are the arguments we can have about that? So the first argument that you can bring about is actually income inequality. Okay, the first thing I want to say about income inequality is that maybe let's put R2A. The first thing I want to say about income inequality is that if you read your lecture notes, right, there are a lot of arguments you can bring about for this point that GDP increases will not lead to SOL increases. There are a lot of points that lecture notes have, okay? But personally, if you ask me, this is the best point, okay? Because most of the time when questions asked in the case material, they usually have this point, and so in kind of like an exam perspective, this is like the most important one. And then secondly, second thing is that it's very relevant, especially for developed countries like ours, right? So in reality, this is also one of the reasons why when you see countries growing, somehow the people are not living better. Okay, so in reality, this is also true lah. So that's why this point is kind of like the better point. Okay, so what's this point? It's essentially saying that when there's a rise in national income, it will not lead to higher SOL because it's not well distributed, right? So in other words, all the growth or the rewards of the growth is going just to a certain sector or to certain parts of the economy. So not all sectors will get to enjoy higher levels of consumption, right? So if because GDP is an average, GDP per capita, sorry, is an average figure. It's just an average figure, right? So just because the class average is higher doesn't mean that everybody in class is doing better. It could be just maybe 5 or 6 students have improved very, very significantly, right? So if that's the case, then for example, in the case where there's economic growth that's driven only by one sector, right? Then income for the workers in that sector will rise, but the rest may not. Okay, so in the answer key, they said healthcare. So they said there's economic growth that's driven by healthcare sector. Okay, I personally don't really like this cause I don't think that the healthcare sector is making a lot of money lah, right? So if you want, you can change it to maybe the technology sector, which I think is pretty true, or maybe the finance sector, right? Which actually these are our two growth drivers in our economy, right? So when we grow, it's typically because we are growing these sectors, right? So workers in these sectors will get to enjoy very, very huge increases in income, right? But it may suggest that on average everybody's improving better, right? Because you just look at the average figure, which for example could be 4%, right? You say 4% is not bad, you know, but actually the poor are not really enjoying this improvement in income, okay? So the proportion of low income and the poor are very large, then the majority of the residents will not experience a rise in SOL. So what the GDP figure does is that the GDP figure, per capita figure, I don't know, right? Sorry, you use the eraser. Okay, so the GDP per capita figure overstates the increase in SOL. So what you're saying is that the number tells a better story than the reality actually is lah. Okay, so GDP overstates the GDP figure overstates the increase in SOL. Okay, so you see here I put a tick here. So whenever I put a tick, it's kind of like a skill or mental habit. So what I put there is you have to learn the elaboration. What I mean by that is that whenever I explain this point to students, they will understand it. They go, yeah, that makes sense, you know. So then they feel like they know it, okay. But when it comes to exam time, when you're writing an essay, you probably most students in the end, their elaboration of this point is only 3 lines because they feel that they understand it, but they cannot elaborate with such depth. Okay, this is a common pitfall. So then when teachers read your elaboration, they'll give you, so there are 3 levels of an essay, right? The highest level is an A. This is where you want to be. Then there's C. It's kind of like meh, you know. K is really the place where you don't want to be, right? Because there's a lack of elaboration, most students will fall into C. And the reason why there's lack of elaboration is because they don't learn the elaboration. They feel that, hey, you know, I know this point, I understand it. But if you cannot replicate with such depth, you don't really know the point yet. Okay, I feel this point is very, very prone to this particular problem. mainly because it's so easy to understand. Okay, can. Okay, so if you have income inequality and it's very severe, what's one way you can solve it? The other way you can, the way you can solve it is maybe to have a fuller picture. I need something that measures or gauges income inequality, and maybe you can say I need the Gini coefficient to tell a better story or fuller picture lah. Okay, can. So the Gini coefficient is a value between 0 and 1, and you want it to be as close to 0 as possible. Okay, so first reason why increase in GDP will not lead to an increase in SOL is because even though the pie is growing, the way it's distributed is skewed. So some people are not really enjoying an increase in GDP as a result. Okay. Okay, second point. The second point has to do with pollution, right? So if you have a higher levels of GDP, then with that also come unintended consequences like, for example, pollution, right, or adverse environmental effects, right? And so, for example, if you have a manufacturing process, and then there's industrial waste or there's CO2 emissions, then for people living near the area of the discharge, then their standard of living is actually decreasing. So this kind of degradation to the environment is not included in the GDP figures. So again, the GDP figures will overstate the increase in SOL. So even though you look at 4% and it looks very rosy, it's not equals to a 4% increase in SOL. That's what it means. Okay, and the main reason is because of pollution. Okay, so here what I have here, or what the answer key has, I didn't really change the answer key, is industrial waste. But it could be true of any other things. For example, urbanization, which increases traffic. So that pretty much affects everybody's quality of life, traffic, right? Noise pollution from construction. This one also affects everybody. So it's construction maybe. Yeah. Okay. Can. So this point is about pollution. Okay. So there are a couple of things I want to say here. Firstly, that you realize this is still requirement 2, right? So requirement 2, I have one point here, the one before that, on distribution. And the second point I have is on environment. Okay. Okay. So here is the important point. Important thing I want to say, which is that, as far as possible, you should have points, including both material as well as non-material, right? In other words, you don't want to just write the income inequality point. Neither do you want to just write the pollution point. You should have points that cover both material as well as non-material. Okay, so the material one, the gap in the material as well is covered by the Gini coefficient or the income inequality. And the gap in the non-material one is covered by pollution. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to say, that when you write your R2, please make sure you have both material and non-material points. Okay, again, there are 3 levels, A, C, and K, and you want to make sure you put yourself in the best position to get the A, which is the best. It means that you have done the requirement to a very good standard. Okay. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to say. You should have material and non-material, which means that you should have both points. Okay. Second thing I want to say is that you can actually have a choice. So if you read your lecture notes, you will know that for the non-material point, there's something about stress and leisure. This is also fine. This is okay to write. You can also write stress and leisure. Okay, if I'm not wrong, the problem 1 answer key says the stress and leisure point. I'm not very sure. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is that you can write pollution, you can write stress or leisure. Both are okay. Okay, just pick one of them and write it, and so that you can cover your bases with regard to the non-material points. Okay, so should include both material and non-material points. Okay, let's get to the last part, which is, I think, conclusions or evaluation. Okay, so in a 15-mark question, it's 10 plus 5. So our R2 covers this, right? Which is the one side that it will, the other side that it won't. right? So then there's this remaining 5 marks, which is the evaluation. So for evaluation, for questions that have an evaluative component, how do you score for the evaluation? In some cases, you can write evaluation in body, but in other cases, they are not appropriate. Then if you cannot find any in body evaluative comments, then you place everything in the conclusion. So here's where I want to teach you how to write the conclusion. Okay. Okay, so this is the way I teach my classes. Okay, so you want to write a good conclusion. You want to make sure that these three qualities come out. Okay, the first one is not trivial, is that you must signpost very clearly. Meaning you want to scream at the examiner and tell the examiner, hey, look, I'm concluding now. Here's where you mark for evaluation. And the reason why is because we mark manuscripts. Not only us, but Cambridge. Okay, they mark manuscripts. So you want to make sure that you make the life of the examiner a lot easier, right? So you say, okay, I'm going to signpost. How do you do that? You first use a new paragraph. Okay, so please don't continue your conclusion by attaching it to the previous paragraph. Then I don't know when your conclusion starts and when it doesn't. Okay, so I like people to start the conclusion with a new paragraph. Okay, preferably you leave a line lah. That's my own personal preference. Before each paragraph, you leave a line so that it's very clear. Okay, okay. Second thing I want to say is that with regard to this signposting is that this is me. Okay, I like students to start with in conclusion. So it really screams at the examiner that, hey, look, I'm concluding. If you want to give me evaluation marks, here's where you do it. Okay, then whether or not he or she actually gives you the evaluation mark is really not up to your control already lah, right? So on your end, what your job is to make sure it's as obvious as it is for this person to give you evaluation marks. Whether or not this person gives you, it's out of your control. It depends on the quality of your point. Okay, so the first thing I want to say with regard to conclusion is please signpost to us, right? Use a new paragraph, leave a line, okay? And you feel that I'm not infringing on your literary freedom, then can you start with in conclusion? So it just makes my life easier. Okay, so you tell me that I'm writing a conclusion. Okay. Okay, the second thing that I feel teachers care about is that they want conclusions that answer the question directly, right? So if I ask you whether economic growth will always lead to a higher standard of living, then you wanna answer me directly. So don't come and like tell me other stuff that's unrelated to this and say, oh, by the way, have you heard you can get economic growth by doing this or doing that? That's not really my question, right? So you want to make sure that you try to answer the question very directly. Okay. In other words, you can start off with in conclusion and then place your stand. That's one possible way lah. Okay, of course later we'll talk about other ways. Okay, so the first two are the easiest to do. Number one and number two. Okay, but surprisingly, still people still don't do it. So I would say do number one and number two first. Okay, then we talk about number three, which is the more difficult thing to do. Okay, number three, the way you want to do evaluation is you try to use buzzwords or techniques. So I'm sure some of your teachers will have gone through these kind of buzzwords or techniques with you. Okay, so what is some of them? Okay, so you can see this orange color words here. These are all the different buzzwords that teachers teachers, answer keys use in their conclusions. Okay, I did not take this. I did not create this. Okay, so there's no need for you to actually copy this. This is actually in the cohort site. I have my own list, but this is what's inside the cohort site. Okay, so in the cohort site they use things like, okay, some things that which I feel that a lot of teachers use are very common. Long run, short run, right? STLT means short term, long term, but long run, short run is the same thing, right? So you can say SRLR, same thing, right? So I'm sure your teacher will have gone through long run, short run with you, right? Severity or magnitude. This one is very applicable to demand and supply, where you don't only talk about which direction the thing is shifting, but how much it is shifting, right? So this is also very common, right? What else? Root cause is also very common, right? This is especially for policy questions, right? So they ask you which is the best policy to solve this market failure. Then you say, oh yeah, this is the best policy because it solves the root cause of the problem, right? So these are buzzwords that I'm sure in the course of your tutorials or your WA 1 and 2, you have encountered it, okay? You want the full list, it's all in the cohort site. So, how do you conclude? How do you try to put yourself in the best position to get as much evaluation marks as possible? The first one is to signpost. Okay. Put a new paragraph, scream at me to tell me that, hey, look, I'm evaluating. Secondly, try to answer the question directly. Okay, don't try to introduce anything new that you memorize of some other answer key or from your other notes. Then after that, the next thing you want to do is you want to use buzzwords or techniques, right? So the full list of buzzwords and techniques are here. Okay, so what I will do, right, is I will show you the answer keys, conclusion, and then what I want to do is I want to highlight to you that, hey, look, they're using this technique, they're using that technique, so that next time when you read answer keys, or you read answer keys or for all the other years, you also know why that is inside the answer key. In other words, why did this answer is a good conclusion. Okay, can. Okay, so let's begin with sort of dissecting what the answer key talks about. Okay, the first thing I'll tell you is that you look, right, I have 3 slides worth of the conclusion. Okay, so so that's the first thing I want to tell people, which is that if your conclusion is 2 lines, right, come on, I'm not going to give you 5 marks just for 2 lines. Okay, so the first thing I would say is it must have sufficient bulk or depth. Right, it must have sufficient bulk or depth. Okay, the second thing is I want to say is that yeah, sorry. Okay, so you must have sufficient bulk or depth. Second thing I want to say related to that is that you must leave sufficient time for it. Okay, if you only leave 2 minutes for it, then obviously it's not going to be enough lah, right? Okay, so make sure you have enough time, because you want to do a good conclusion like this, it takes time. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so the first thing you want to do, you realize in the answer key as well, is that we signpost. We tell people, hey, look, this is a conclusion, right? So in your paper, what you should do, you should leave a line, you have a new paragraph. Okay, so you signpost very clearly. And then you see what follows from the first sentence of the conclusion is that it answers the question very directly. Will economic growth always lead to a higher standard of living? Then you say, yes, the level of what actually determines whether economic growth, what determines whether economic growth will lead to higher standard of living is the level of development of the economy. Right. Okay, then after that, it goes on to substantiate and tell people, okay, why do I say what I say? The reason why is because if your MSL is largely already met, then you would look at the non-material components with a little bit more scrutiny, right? And so in those cases, then it's more important for the government to include spending on things that to curb pollution, like green technology and so forth. Okay, so you will see in your the buzzwords and techniques that one of the things they said is you should try to use evidence, or you should try to elaborate a little bit more lah, right? So this is an example of doing so, right? Okay, then however, at the same time, you have to take note that if growth is driven by highly pollutive industries, then the material standard of living may be offset with lower aspects of non-material standard of living. So this is an example, like an application of trade-offs. Okay, so trade-offs is also another technique that you can use that's here. Okay, then finally, again, how the economic growth is achieved is also an important consideration. So they ask you, hey, look, do you think economic growth will always lead to a higher standard of living? Then you say, yeah, sometimes, but sometimes maybe not. It all depends, right? So it all depends, right? So if it depends, what does it depend on? So it depends on the state of the economy and the level of development, right? So this is like providing context, or talking about circumstances, or asking you to ask questions about the assumptions that are made, which is here. Okay, can. Okay, finally, they say that so this is the same point. If it comes from pollution or depletion of resources, there is a trade-off that you're making. So trade-offs are another example. The discharge of CO2 into the river, we've also mentioned. This is the evidence for the particular trade-off. Okay. Can. Okay. So this is a very very long conclusion, and I think for some people it doesn't really make you cannot really see the link between this and the orange color words, or you can say that actually even if I have the orange color words, I don't think I'll be able to generate something like this. That's fine. Okay, so the thing about conclusion is that I feel that a lot of students have this misconception that conclusions are about replication, but it really isn't. So just because you can replicate this doesn't mean you can do very well. Right? Unlike the R1 R2 analysis marks, our conclusion are really not about replication. It's about the quality of your insights that you have from these kind of buzzwords. Okay, but I will stress this, okay, that you should try your best to have these three qualities lah. So signpost first, answer the question directly, and then try your best to use the buzzwords or techniques that are there. Okay, this is all orange color words are all on the cohort side. Okay, like what I said, if your teacher has any other techniques that he or she has taught you, then you can use those as well. Okay. Okay, the last part I want to say, just to recap what we've done. Okay, so first thing I mentioned at the start of R1 is that it's always helpful to define for SOL, because then it tells you material and non-material aspects. Okay, for SOL questions, technical terms are very very important. Technical terms like purchasing power, goods and services, and higher material standard of living. Okay, some points are more important than others, but to do well, you want to make sure you write a little bit more. So don't always ask teachers, must I write this, must I write that? If you need to ask, right, then you will likely not get the A. Right, so you don't want to really chase the bottom. If you can write more, write a bit more. What I mean by that, so if you know this, right, and you say, hey, this is a bit too short, can I also do this? So yes, you can, right? I've given you the point in the previous video. Okay, next one, just because you understand something doesn't mean you don't need to learn the elaboration. So I mentioned about this is about the Gini coefficient point, right? That everybody knows or understand the point very intuitively, but when you write it, you only write 3 lines. Then you ask yourself, hey, how come answer key got 7 lines, I only write 3 lines? Okay, next one, in your SOL questions, you might make sure you have both material and non-material points. Okay, there are 3 levels, A, C, and K. Sometimes to get to the A, you need to have both material and non-material. So you want to put yourself in the best position. You cannot control what the answer key requires. You can control your effort. Okay, last part about conclusion. I like to digest how to write conclusion into these 3 simple steps, because I don't like to complicate things too much. So for me, I would tell people, please signpost, tell me in conclusion, right? And then after that, answer the question directly. Then please, you want to score, try to use buzzwords. The list of buzzwords, they are all here. Okay.